At what age can somebody become a Noahide judge? A Noahide judge is a judge who rules on the 7 Noahide commandments in a Noahide society. What is the minimum age that somebody can become a Noahide judge? It's probably more nuanced than you think. First, we know that non-Jews are not explicitly commanded in minimum amounts like Jews are. Thus, the Torah does not specifically state a numerical age for when somebody can become a Noahide judge. Because of this, we look to general halakhic principles and Jewish legal models to guide our understanding. But at the same time, remember that the Noahide laws are rational laws. The obligation to uphold justice is not only to pursue justice, but also to prevent injustice, to prevent chaos and disorder. So even if the Torah does not give an explicit number, it's rational to implement a practical minimum age at which somebody can become a Noahide judge. After all, we wouldn't want just 10-year-olds becoming Noahide judges. So the question kind of then becomes, at what level of maturity would we reasonably expect somebody to be able to become a Noahide judge? To decide how old a Noahide judge should be, let's first start at the most basic level, which is when somebody becomes obligated to keep the Noahide commandments. And when one becomes obligated to keep the Noahide commandments, one also becomes obligated to keep the Noahide commandment to uphold justice. Now, a Noahide male is generally considered to become obligated when he reaches moral understanding, what in Hebrew is called da'at. In practice, this is often associated with the age of 13 years old. Now, from a purely technical standpoint, one could argue that once somebody becomes obligated to keep the commandment to uphold justice, one also then could serve as a judge, since he's now obligated in this commandment. And so from a technical standpoint, one could argue that once somebody is 13 years old, they can become a Noahide judge. But this obviously kind of seems irrational. Judging requires more than just age. There are many requirements that a judge must have, and even if a 13-year-old meets these requirements, a 13-year-old usually does not have the same restraint and moral understanding and sense of responsibility as somebody who is more mature has. The qualities of a Noahide judge usually take more time to develop. In part for this reason, Jewish authorities do not treat the age of liability, 13 years old, as the practical age for serving as a judge. And we may find a good illustration of this in the Bible. The sages don't necessarily bring up the following proof, but I think it can serve as a good illustration. After the rape of their sister Dinah, Shimon and Levi took each man his sword and slew all of the males of the city of Shechem. Importantly, the Bible calls Shimon and Levi men, not children, so they are liable in the commandments, and the oral tradition says that they were 13 years old at the time. But let's briefly analyze their act of justice as 13-year-olds. Now, the prince of Shechem is obviously liable for kidnapping Dinah and raping her, but Noahides holds that all of the males of the city were also liable for idolatry and forbidden relations, which were typical of Canaanite societies at that time. But Shimon and Levi, in their anger over Dinah's rape, used the excuse of liability for idolatry and forbidden relations to then go and kill all the males of the city. Technically, they were all liable to die, they performed justice, and judging all of them to death, they likely convened a court, but their justice was done out of rage, not impartiality. In fact, Jacob, the father of Shimon and Levi, ended up cursing Shimon and Levi on his deathbed for their anger and wrath. I think this serves as an illustration that justice should not be biased by emotion, and the younger in age that one is, the more typical we see that emotion biases their judgments. Even these righteous 13-year-olds, Shimon and Levi, from whom the tribes of Shimon and Levi come from, in fact, one of them is the priestly tribe, they may have performed justice, but not with the correct motives of a proper judge. So perhaps the age should be greater than 13 for a Noahide judge. Some authorities hold that the minimum age to judge should be 18 years old. This view is based on a passage concerning Josiah in 2 Kings. 2 Kings first says that Josiah did what was right in the eyes of Hashem, in the eyes of God. Yet later it says that there was no king before him that returned to Hashem with all his heart. This creates a difficulty. If Josiah was always righteous, then what does it mean that he returned? What did he return from? He didn't return from evil because he was always righteous. Our sages explain that Josiah reconsidered the judgments that he had made in his earlier life. Here's the background. Before Josiah, the previous kings were wicked. As such, the Torah was not being properly taught or followed under their reigns. Josiah then becomes king at the young age of 8, and he's described as righteous from the beginning. The Bible then tells us that in the 18th year of King Josiah, a Torah scroll was discovered in the temple. When the Torah is read to King Josiah, Josiah tears his clothes in distress. He realizes that the nation is far from what the Torah demands. Josiah then returns to God with all his power. He reenacted the covenant with God, which the previous kings had broken. He destroyed all the idolatry that was in the nation. He restored Israel to proper worship, and the sages say he reviewed his earlier judgments in light of the Torah, and he corrected them when he thought necessary. So that's what they say it means when he returned to God. He returned back to the judgments that he had previously made without the full knowledge of the Torah. But here's the catch for our discussion. The Bible is ambiguous when it says, in the 18th year of King Josiah, because we could derive an age from this verse. But is it talking about age? It could mean that King Josiah was 18 years old, or it could mean that it was in the 18th year of King Josiah's reign, so he would be 26 years old. He was king at 8, and then add 18 years, 26. And as you'll see, this dispute has big implications. So some authorities understand that the verse means 18 years old. According to this understanding, Josiah judged at an early age when he was 8 years old, but only at 18 years old did he reach a level of proper understanding that allowed him to properly evaluate the rulings that he had made previously. So from this, they infer that before the age of 18, judgments are not fully reliable. King Josiah was righteous from 8 to 18, and yet he still reconsidered the judgments that he had made before the age of 18. So therefore, 18 should be the minimum age for a judge. Others, though, like the famous biblical commentator Rashi, says that the verse is referring to the year of King Josiah's reign, not King Josiah's age. So since he became king at 8 years old, that would make him 26 years old when this occurred. According to this interpretation, then, the passage is just merely describing a historical moment, and the number 18 is just a timestamp for when this moment occurred. It's not establishing an age requirement. But what about age 26? Could we make this as the age for a Noahide judge? From my understanding, since the number 26 is not mentioned in the explicit written Bible or in the oral tradition, it wouldn't be interpreted as legally meaningful. But despite this debate, many authorities hold that the minimum age should be 18 years old. This is based on the first interpretation that we offered, as well as the general consideration for maturity. They also explain that at this age, a male is generally considered to be capable of acting with independence, of exercising judgment and defending the rights of others, like being able to save the poor from the hand of the robber. And these are essential qualities of a judge, specifically that of an ish chayil, a man of power, might, or strength. Now, even though authorities adopt 18 as the minimum age, they still add an important qualification. In a particular responsa, it is written that although there's a basis for allowing judges to judge at the age of 18, one should not appoint a fixed judge until the age of 20. Now, to be honest, I couldn't locate the source for why age 20, but I'll link the source in the description in case any of you guys can find it and read the Hebrew. And if you do, please comment and I'll pin it. But an even higher standard is given than just 18 to 20. Modern authorities seem to agree that, yes, we can appoint judges at the age of 18 to 20, but they should only serve on a panel of judges at these ages. In order to judge alone, though, one should ideally wait until they are 40 years old. Finally, at 40 years old, one is assumed to have attained his full power of understanding and wisdom that would be necessary for him to claim expertise to judge alone. But also another reason is that below the age of 40, perhaps the rulings would not be respected by the public. If a 20-year-old just ruled alone, the public may not respect his authority, even though they're required to. So let's put this all together now. We've kind of been everywhere. The theoretical minimum age is around 13 years old. This is when somebody becomes liable in the Noahide commandment to uphold justice. But this wouldn't be rational for us to have 13-year-olds become Noahide judges. So the practical minimum age is 18 to 20 years old. And to judge alone, they should ideally be 40 years old. As Noahides, it behooves us to follow these numbers. Rabbi Moshe Weiner in the Divine Code says that a Noahide judge should at least be 18 to 20 years old and age 40 to rule alone. But even still, these numbers aren't absolute. If no more qualified judge is available that is of these ages, a younger individual may serve when necessary. Because maintaining our Noahide obligation to uphold justice is more important than making sure a judge meets the age limit. Remember, Shimon and Levi did perform justice at the age of 13. It's just not an ideal form of justice, the ideal justice that we would want our Noahide societies to uphold. Now, before we close, I found something interesting that kind of goes along with this. No authorities actually mentioned it, but we see a parallel of these ages in Pirkei Avot, the Ethics of the Fathers. For those of you who don't know, the Ethics of the Fathers is a collection of wisdom teachings from the early rabbis in around 200 of the Common Era. It says, at 13, one is subject to the commandments. At 18, the bridal canopy. I wish. At 20, the pursuit of livelihood. And at 40, wisdom. So maybe we can see a slight parallel between the numbers of the Ethics of the Fathers and the numbers that our current modern authorities give us. So a brief summary. What is the minimum age that a male can become a Noahide judge? Technically, non-Jews aren't commanded in minimum amounts, but it is practical and rational for us to look at the Jewish amounts when it comes to these ages. One really shouldn't become a judge before he's 18 to 20 years old, and one shouldn't judge alone until he's age 40. Many derive the age of 18 from King Josiah when he reviewed his past judgments, but many also just see 18 to 20 as a fit number. 40 years old is when one is assumed to have acquired the wisdom and understanding necessary to be an expert. So at this age, one is allowed to be an expert judge presiding alone. This video is on age requirements for a Noahide judge. On this channel, we go through the entire Noahide legal system, which is the legal system of the future. So subscribe to stay tuned. Thank you, as always, for watching.